In this video, we're going to go over for loops. So I've commented some information about for loops. Anytime we see a for loop, we should interpret it as for each iterative value that meets a certain condition, execute this line of code. So for loops have three different parts. We first have to initialize the iterative value, and generally that's going to be I. And then we have to have a condition on the iterative value that it has to meet, else we get an infinite loop. And then we need to increment or decrement the value. Usually we do that by one, but you can set it to skip by whatever you want. And at some point, the middle condition will not trigger. So if we set this up, we can do something simple. We can make a method called static. We'll make it a void method, and we'll just call it print I. We'll say print iteration, and it's not going to take in any value. So again, for loop, it has three parts. So we have for, and then we have what goes inside the parentheses. Inside the parentheses, we have to declare an integer that's going to be our iterative value. So I'm going to use iteration right now, and we're going to start at 0. So after the first and second condition, we have to put a semicolon. So we have int iteration equals 0. The second part is that we have to have a condition that this iteration has to meet. We're going to say iteration is less than 10. So if we're starting at 0 and going up by 10, say we wanted to increase by 1, we're going to do I++. And so right now, because this part is telling us to just go up by 1 every time, we're going to start at 0 and go up to 10, but not include 10. So we'd expect this to run 10 times, but if we ever reference the value of I, it will probably stop at 9. So inside this loop, we're going to say we're just going to tell it to print the value of I or iteration. Oh, actually, we can just do the value. Why is this mouse jumping around? So this loop has run iteration times. Oh, we don't need two space. Oh yeah. So when we what error are we getting? I cannot be resolved to variable. Here we need to make this iteration, and we're gonna save this. And inside our main method, we're gonna. I'm still in. Let's shut this down. So we'll need to create a main method. So public static void main string, and we're going to just call this method print. Man, this new computer, print iteration. And when we tell this to run, what we expect to happen is for each time it runs through, it's going to say this loop has run 0 times. You know what? I actually will say iteration plus 1 times. So that would make sense because we're starting at 0. You know what? Just to be entirely correct, let's put some proper grammar in here. So now when we run this, we will get, it's going at the bottom. So we get this loop has run 1 time, this loop has run 2 times, this loop has run 3 times, this loop has run 4 times, and so forth up to I equals 9. But since we did iteration plus 1, it's going to be 10 times. So we ran through this where we iterated the value by increasing. Now, we could also do this where we ran this by decreasing the value of iteration. But now if we ran this as is, we would get an infinite loop because it's going to start at 0 and keep subtracting 1 each time. And so iteration is never going to be greater than 10. So to get around that, we could just switch this around while iteration is greater than 0, for instance. And then we need to change where it starts. So we'll start this at 0. I said 0 and I still type 10. So while this iteration is greater than 0, we're going to run this again. And what we expect to happen this time is that it's going to say this loop has run iteration times. So it's going to be 10, 9, 8, 7, and so forth. So when we run this, we get at the top, this touchpad. So it starts at 10, goes down to 9, 8, and all the way to 1. So it's not a terribly interesting example of how for loops are useful. We can use this to do slightly more interesting things. Say we wanted to make a method where we printed the times tables for, we'll say, like an elementary school person. So if we had a static void, and we'll say print, we'll call it just multiples. We'll say print multiples. And for this method, we're going to have a number as the parameter, just an integer, a single number as the parameter. And this method, we wanted to print the times tables up to 12 for a particular value. So let's see, we'll still need our for loop. So we're going to have for int I equals 0. And in this case, if we want to, we're doing our times table. So we're going to start at 1. I guess we can start at 0. We're going to have, if we're going to go up to 12, we need to start at 0 and go up to 12. So we're going to have int, we're going to have I is less than 13. This would be the same as if we did less than or equal to 12. It's just a preference. We'll just do less than or equal to 12. And we're going to do I plus plus, close this. And so for the body of this loop, we wanted to print out, for instance, 0 times the number equals whatever that product is. So we're going to have system.out, and we're going to have, so we're going to say I, this cursor is so sensitive. I, and then we're going to actually write the word times. We're going to put num, and then we're going to have equals, and we actually want to do that product. So then we're going to do I times num. I'm missing a plus, excuse me. And we'll put it in parentheses just to be proper. So when we run through this loop, what we expect to happen is when I is 0, we're going to have 0 times whatever value of num is going to equal 0 times num, which is going to be 0. So we expect 0, then it's going to go through and check 1. It's going to have 1 times whatever num is. That's going to equal 1 times num, which is num. And then for 2, 2 times num equals double that number, then triple, then 4, and so forth. To call this method, we're going to say, we call it print multiples. So let's do that instead. We need to pass it. Say we wanted to do this for 13. So we'll save this and we run it, and we get, so 0 times 13 equals 0, 1 times 13 equals 13, 2 times 13 equals 26, all the way up to 12 times 13, and we get 156. Again, we could have started this at the top, and we could have said I equals 12, and we could have run this loop until we get to 0, and we would then have to decrease by 1. And then when we run this, we get the same thing, just in reverse order. we get 12 times 13 is 156, 11 times 13 is 143, and so forth. Now, another thing we could do is we could just print the even multiples of 13 if we wanted. So if we started this back at 0, which would be the more natural way, we could do I plus equals 2. And so we need to change this to back to less than or equal to 12. And this is going to be plus equals 2. And so when we change this around, it should just print the even multiples of 13. And we run this. And that's exactly what we get. We get 0 times 13, 2, 4, 6, 8, up to 12. So that's one way we can use a loop if we're processing numbers. A more interesting way would be to create a method that allowed us to do something useful. So we're going to delete this and say we come along and say we wanted to make reverse a word. So you had to do this, I think, as a project. Let's go back over this. We have static, we'll say string, and we'll call it reverse. And it's going to take a string that we'll say word. And for this, we want this to return a word reversed. So we need 4. Let's see, we'll make int x equals word dot length. We'll need that for a moment. So for int I, and I is going to start out as, we're going to make I initially equal to x minus 1. And the reason for that is to access the last letter of a string, it's always one less than the length of the word. So then we want I to just be greater than or equal to 0, because that's going to get us to the first letter. And then we want to go down by 1 each time. And so now that we have this, how do we actually print the word in reverse? So if we're going to start at the last letter, we actually need another string. Let's say string reverse equals, and important is you need to initialize a string or a variable that you're going to use inside the loop. So we initialize this to be a blank string, and we're going to have reverse. We're just going to each time update it with the value of word dot substring. We want it to do I and I plus 1. So if we start out at the word dot length minus 1, that's going to be the last letter and the next index, which is it goes up to but doesn't include. So this will get us the last letter, and it'll process that until we get to 0. So when this gets to 0, it's going to be word dot substring 0 to 1, which would only print the first letter. So it does. So it does work as we intend. And just at the end, we need to return our string reverse. So now, when we refer to that, we're gonna change this to so we want to do reverse, and let's say we pass it the word computer, for instance. System. And when we run this, it turns it back around. We get whatever, retup mock or something. So even that is not a terribly interesting use of a for loop. Now, what we can do is use this method that reverses a word to do something that might be useful. So imagine we type another method that we call static Boolean is palindrome. and it's still going to take the same string word and do some stuff. God, this touchpad is ridiculous. So now what this method intends to do is determine if a word is a palindrome. So a word is a palindrome if it is the same spelled forwards or backwards. An example would be the word radar, level, de-leveled is actually another example. So to do that, we need to know the word in reverse and the actual word. Now, fortunately, we already have a method that reverses a word. So all we need is an if condition that checks this. So if, and see, we can refer to, so we can do if reverse word, which returns the reversed word. And to compare strings for equality, we use dot equals. We do not use the double equal sign. To compare strings, we use dot equals. So if reverse word if it equals word, then we want to return true, and else we can return false. All right, one, in Java is lowercase false, in Python is all these things are capitalized. So now we have this public, we have this Boolean is palindrome. So here, instead of using the reverse method to print something, we can use it to check something. So now we're just gonna do is palindrome. Let's see, we can try a word like we can try computer again actually. And then system line is palindrome, and all right, so when we run this, it gives us false. And if we change this to be, I don't know, like one of the words that we checked, radar, for instance. God dog, this computer. We run. When we run this time, we get true, and then we can type in whatever things we want. We can type in, I don't know, race car, for instance. It'll give us true still. If we copy this and paste it, and then we use we run this, it's going to give us true and false because it's not a palindrome. But if we typed in ABBA, for instance, they give us two trues. So now we reference the method inside of another method, and one of the methods contained a for loop. So a quick review is, again, for loops should be interpreted as for each value that meets a particular condition, execute this code. They have three parts. We initialize the iterative value. We have a condition that value must meet. And then we iterate that value either by increasing or decreasing generally, but you can be creative in how that works. I hope this is helpful. See you in class.